When Trump launched his tariff barrage, targeting Canadian steel, aluminum, and even tech, he thought he could scare Ottawa into submission with 301 threats and Twitter tantrums. Instead, he walked right into Mark Carney's economic caldera. Carney didn't just block the attack. He counterstruck with surgical precision. The 50% tariff on $22 billion worth of American metals wasn't a reflex. It was a calculated move in a diplomatic chess game Trump never learned to play. Trump's brand of leadership thrives on drama, threats, tantrums, Twitter rants. But Carney understood that real power lurks beneath headlines, rooted in clarity, coherence, and credible follow-through. Trump wanted a headline war.
If you're done watching corrupt elites rig the system and leave you behind, subscribe now. If you want real talk, raw truth, and zero spin, this is your channel. If you're ready to fight back, hit that subscribe button and stand with us.
Carney delivered something far more destructive, a supply chain decimation that forced U.S. automakers to bleed margins or raise prices, all while Canadian plants kept humming. That's not emotional, it's existential. In Michigan and Ohio, boardrooms went into crisis management mode. Cold-rolled steel comprised a major cost line for automakers, and overnight, production budgets ballooned. Car subsidy talks, emergency profit reviews, they all followed. The political pressure mounted. With shareholders whining and employees speculating, U.S. Congress suddenly woke up, wondering if endless tariff posturing was worth this economic pain. Faced with this blunt force, Trump tried an old trick, retaliation. He threatened broader sanctions. He hinted at revoking NAFTA clauses. But Carney stayed one move ahead. Ottawa's pause on the DST stripped Trump of his legal justification. Without an active tax, there was no prima facie basis for a 301 probe. Canada had taken away his ammunition and forced him back to the negotiating table. Trump's tariffs didn't just disrupt steel. They triggered a market earthquake. As U.S. gas supply pipelines shrank, Europe turned to Canadian and Qatari LNG. Fertilizer costs soared. Wheat acreage collapsed. Canada quietly capitalized, filling vaults, securing contracts, and building export bridges across Asia and Africa. Behind the scenes, farmers in Saskatchewan raised yields while Midwestern U.S. fields lay fallow. Carney never flinched. He didn't scream at rallies or posture impressors. He met with provincial premiers, business leaders, and diplomatic allies. He convened caucuses. He crafted federal subsidies. He used language that evoked both economic resilience and democratic values, leaving the emotion to Trump, but claiming the results for Canada. Trump's refusal to engage directly helped Canada escalate via infrastructure. Proposed tolls on the Alaska Highway, beyond trade treaties, weren't just punitive. They were purposeful. Alaskans face an immediate crisis. Soaring food prices, ration fuel, delayed shipments. Emergency aid requests to Washington were met with silence. Trump's inaction only confirmed that Canada held another strategic lever. Markets are rarely fooled. Canadian bond yields dipped as capital streamed north. U.S. equities in exposed sectors lagged. American CEOs started quietly reassessing North American expansion plans, especially in automotive, energy, and ag-tech. Capital reallocation isn't flashy, but it moves markets. And this time, the money moved toward Canada. Remember that 3% DST? Though paused, it's still a hostage in Carney's vault. Ottawa signaled this wasn't temporary goodwill. It was tactical restraint. If U.S. tariffs aren't lifted by year's end, Canada would reactivate the tax retroactively, costing U.S. tech giants billions. Big tech knows it. Trump knows it. Canada's leverage remains intact, quietly primed. As U.S.-Canada cooperation faltered, Canada doubled down on global reach. Talks with the EU sped up. CPTPP expansion advanced. New export finance deals opened in Southeast Asia. Canada wasn't just dodging Trump's attack. It was building bridges with the rest of the world. Each new trade lane represented a geopolitical statement. We don't need America's approval to succeed. Back in Ottawa, Carney's measured rhetoric fostered unity. Parliamentarians across parties praised his restraint. Provinces rallied behind their renewable and ag industries. Meanwhile, in the U.S., Trump's policies fueled fissures. Farmers devastated. Plants shutting down. Opinion polls dropping. The promise America first image faded amid bread lines and bread shortages. To quell mounting pressure, Trump tried to pivot, heading to Ottawa with a braggadocious tone and no real offer. But Carney wasn't interested in photo ops. He outlined Canada's terms. Repeal tariffs, commit to dispute resolution clauses, and allow Canadian gas and grain access. Trump's empty suitcase of threats and promises wasn't enough. His visit ended in schmooze, not schmozzle, but no agreement. Under Carney's lead, Canada redefined geopolitical power, not through alliances alone, but by demonstrating measured defense of national sovereignty. Tariffs were used sparingly and strategically. Economic systems remained intact. Global partnerships grew. Domestic cohesion tightened. Trump? He flew home without a single concession. His headlines fell flat. His base grumbled. And America's credibility in trade negotiations dented further. The message is loud and clear. You can't bully a nation that plans for moves ahead. You can't out-threaten a country that values stability over spectacle. Carney didn't just parry Trump's tariff swing. He reset the board and claimed the future. This isn't political theater. It's economic power, strategic design, and the dawning of a new global playbook. And right now, the world's watching how Canada took a punch and landed one of its own. Strategic calm versus manufactured chaos. While Donald Trump rants and raves in front of his captive rallies, throwing out catchphrases like, "Canada's ripping us off," Mark Carney sits in a quiet Ottawa boardroom, blueprinting economic stability, like a chess grandmaster plotting 10 moves ahead. And when Trump's trade tirade reached its boiling point, it wasn't Canada that blinked. It was Trump who found himself crawling back, hat in hand, because his own base was starting to feel the pain. The auto industry revolts. Trump's reckless tariffs on Canadian metals, his so-called national security crusade, backfired so spectacularly that even Detroit couldn't keep quiet. When steel and aluminum prices surged due to a 50% retaliatory tariff from Canada, U.S. automakers like Ford, GM, and Chrysler started slashing output forecasts. Layoffs followed. Share prices dipped. Republican donors in Michigan made urgent calls to the White House demanding relief. Carney, meanwhile, hadn't lifted a finger. He didn't need to. Trump's bluster had backed him into a corner where Canada's quiet pressure did all the talking. Farm Belt backlash. While Trump was busy defending big tech from Canada's 3% digital services tax, American farmers were watching their international contracts collapse. China, Europe, even Brazil were buying Canadian wheat, beef, and lentils, products Trump had tariffed into obscurity. Farm bankruptcies in the U.S. hit a 10-year high. But north of the border, Canadian farmers were expanding operations with government subsidies, hiring workers, and investing in climate-resilient technology. In the eyes of rural America, Trump had failed them, and in the eyes of rural Canada, Carney had protected them. The Alaska squeeze. Trump didn't think twice when he mocked Canadian trade policy, but he forgot one inconvenient detail. Alaska, his so-called bastion of independence, depends almost entirely on Canadian roads, fuel, and freight. And when Carney floated the idea of tolling the Alcan Highway, prices for Alaskan food, gas, and medical supplies shot up overnight, just at the threat. Trump's phone lit up with calls from Republican governors. His tough guy act was suddenly a liability, and Carney hadn't even signed the toll bill yet. That's the difference between theater and strategy. Carney played the long game, a trade war built on lies. Let's be clear. The digital services tax was an attack on America. It was a fair response to a global crisis of tax evasion by trillion-dollar tech firms. But Trump spun it into a nationalist sob story. They're taxing our companies unfairly, he bellowed. But who paid the price for his tantrum? You did. Every American who bought a car, ate a sandwich, or filled up their gas tank felt the sting of Canada's retaliation. And when those costs started rising, Trump's approval in swing states started dropping. The tariff that broke the bullhorn. Carney's 50% tariff wasn't just economic. It was surgical. It hit red states, corporate donors, and key supply chains. And when Wall Street reacted with panic, Trump's go-to-distraction move, blame someone else, didn't work. Because this time it was clear Trump poked the wrong bear. He made an enemy out of Canada, a country that had always been the U.S.'s most peaceful partner. He turned a tax disagreement into an international incident. And Carney? He let the numbers speak. Stock markets dipped. Energy prices surged. Food costs rose. Trump's echo chamber started to fracture. Carney's poker face. No tweets. No cable news rants. No rallies with red hats and chants. Carney stayed quiet. But behind the scenes, he held the cards. He paused the digital tax. Not canceled it. Paused. Knowing full well that the threat was more powerful than the implementation. Trump couldn't declare victory. He couldn't declare defeat. And he certainly couldn't ignore the pressure building from every economic sector he just wounded. Carney's move didn't just stall the trade war. It flipped the board entirely. The return to the table. In late-night calls no camera captured, White House trade representatives came back to the table. And this time, they were begging for terms. Trump's leverage was gone. His chest thumping had cost American jobs, jacked up prices, and fractured critical trade routes. Carney, with cold precision, offered to delay tariffs if the U.S. agreed to a series of concessions on agriculture, energy, and data privacy. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an economic surrender, masked in diplomatic formality. Energy sovereignty stings back. When Manitoba announced the cancellation of a massive electricity export contract to the U.S., Trump laughed it off, until the lights started flickering across northern states during peak season. Canada wasn't bluffing. It was building resilience, shoring up domestic supply, and making Trump's energy policies look like they were written in crayon. Carney knew the political risk. Yes, it might raise Canadian rates, but he also knew the strategic value of not being America's doormat. Corporate allies turned enemies. In boardrooms across Silicon Valley and Wall Street, the whispers turned into meetings. Executives who once toasted Trump's tax cuts were now furious. His trade war with Canada was hitting their bottom lines. Manufacturing costs up, global markets shaken, foreign investment drying. Trump didn't lose the confidence of his critics. He lost the confidence of his friends. Meanwhile, Carney was securing deals in Berlin, Tokyo, and Delhi, building alliances for a post-American dominant economy. The optics of collapse. Trump, once the self-proclaimed master of the deal, now looked like a child throwing monopoly money during a stock market crash. The U.S. economy, which had once coasted on cheap imports and manipulated markets, now faced a cold new reality. When your biggest trading partner has had enough, you either adapt or spiral. Carney didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He had exposed Trump for what he was, a loudmouth with no exit strategy. Conclusion: the transcript didn't sugarcoat it. Trump's trade war was a disaster, and Carney's calm response was a masterclass in leadership. By weaponizing patience, foresight, and diplomacy, Carney made it clear: Canada is not a sidekick. It's a sovereign nation, ready to stand up, speak up, and fight back when pushed. And in the end, Trump didn't break Canada. Canada broke Trump's myth of invincibility. The farm crisis Trump didn't see coming. As Trump puffed up on stage claiming, "We're winning the trade war," American wheat farmers were quietly going under. His tariffs, meant to punish Canada, had the opposite effect. They opened up markets for Canadian grain, especially in Asia and Europe, where Canadian wheat quickly replaced American supply. Farm bankruptcies skyrocketed in places like Kansas and Nebraska. The forgotten men and women Trump promised to protect were now facing foreclosure. Meanwhile, Carney's agricultural policies stabilized Canadian farming through strategic subsidies and infrastructure investments. Grain silos were full, exports were thriving, and Carney didn't need a rally to remind Canadians why. They could feel the security in their wallets and their homes. Trump couldn't offer the same to his base. Inflation ignites middle-class rage. Trump's tariffs weren't just abstract economic chess pieces. They were attacks on everything Americans touch. Construction, costs up. Groceries, more expensive. Energy bills, spiked. And when inflation hit double digits in key swing states, even Trump's loyal supporters started to ask, where's the win? The Federal Reserve was trapped, unable to lower rates because tariffs kept prices high, and unable to raise them because growth was faltering. Carney, by contrast, worked hand-in-hand with the Bank of Canada to ensure price stability. His coordination wasn't flashy, it was effective. While the U.S. economy teetered, Canada held the line. Carney's global trade web expands. As Trump alienated allies with his America First rhetoric, Carney did the opposite. He deepened ties with the European Union, signed digital trade agreements with Japan, and opened new markets in India and sub-Saharan Africa. When Trump threatened to blacklist countries that supported Canada's digital tax framework, they laughed and signed on anyway. Carney was building a 21st century trade architecture, one based on fairness, sustainability, and multilateral cooperation. Trump was still stuck in the 1980s, screaming about steel and coal. The contrast couldn't be sharper. One man was building the future. The other was clinging to a fantasy. Another miscalculation by Trump, assuming that Canada couldn't build its own digital ecosystem. His tantrum over the DST was meant to intimidate, but it ended up accelerating innovation north of the border. Ottawa invested heavily in homegrown cloud platforms, AI startups, and data centers. Toronto's tech sector boomed. Montreal became a hub for ethical AI research. And those American tech giants Trump tried to protect, they started hedging their bets, quietly relocating jobs and infrastructure to friendlier, more stable climates. Canada, under Carney's vision, became a haven for digital investment, precisely because it refused to bow to corporate intimidation. Initially, Trump's media machine portrayed Carney's pause of the DST as a victory. He blinked, screamed Fox News. But within weeks, the truth emerged. It wasn't a blink. It was bait. Carney had paused the tax, not canceled it, and in return had gained valuable concessions behind closed doors. The media couldn't spin it anymore. Carney's restraint had created a diplomatic opening that forced Trump to accept terms he once mocked. By the time the next round of negotiations was underway, even conservative commentators were forced to admit Carney had outplayed the bluster with brains. In Canada, the mood was shifting from polite resilience to proud defiance. Polls showed overwhelming support for Carney's handling of the trade crisis. Citizens who had once been skeptical of economic policy were now engaged, informed, and energized, and the political payoff was huge. Carney's approval rating soared. Trudeau-era liberals were washed away by a wave of new support for smart, technocratic governance. Carney didn't just beat Trump in negotiations. He redefined what Canadian leadership looked like on the world stage. Back in the U.S., things were unraveling. Truckers protested fuel costs. Manufacturers demanded tariff relief. Midwestern governors pleaded for farm bailouts. And through it all, Trump clung to the narrative that the tariffs were working. But working for who? Certainly not the consumers paying more at the grocery store. Not the workers laid off in tariff-slammed industries. And not the military families in Alaska now facing $9 per gallon gasoline thanks to Canadian toll pressure. The emperor had no clothes, and Americans were finally noticing. Even after pausing the digital tax, Carney kept it alive in legislation, ready to reinstate if the U.S. backslid on promises. That threat alone gave him immense leverage in every round of talks. Trump, on the other hand, had exhausted his arsenal. His tariffs had failed. His bluster had been neutralized. His political capital was drained. The only thing left was to show up quietly off camera and ask Ottawa for a new deal. That's not winning. That's losing with style. What this trade war proved, without a doubt, is that Canada will not be pushed around. Not by Wall Street. Not by Washington. And definitely not by a man whose economic strategy reads like a casino playbook. Under Carney, Canada emerged not just as a trade partner, but as a global standard bearer for fairness, discipline, and democratic integrity. And in doing so, it delivered a lesson to every other mid-sized power watching from the sidelines. You don't need to shout to lead. You don't need to punch first to win. You just need to know where to apply pressure, when to wait, and how to defend your values without ever losing your cool. Trump once said trade wars are easy to win. Canada proved otherwise. Under Mark Carney's watch, the country turned what could have been an economic assault into a showcase of strategy, composure, and national unity. In the end, it wasn't the fireworks or the tweets that shaped the future. It was the slow burn of smart policy, patient negotiation, and the quiet power of a leader who didn't need to scream to be heard. Trump may have crawled back to Ottawa, but history will remember who stood tall.